Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where it's all the literature worth arguing about. That's my new phrase. Do you guys like that?
Really? You're gonna stick with that?
Yeah, it's better than Lara's.
What's mine?
I don't know, but I brain dumped it right away because I didn't think it was relevant. But anyway, welcome back to the Papers Podcast. The crew is all here. We are debating papers. It's Linda's paper today, but first of all, I want to welcome Lara.
Hello, everybody.
My half-sister.
Which
John.
half? I'm the good-looking half. And the younger half.
Fair
Let's
enough.
keep going.
Smarter. All right. John, welcome, bud.
Hey, I'm the bottom half. Is that
All right, Linda, save us. You save us from the censors.
Going bad.
You got a paper for us.
I do have a paper for you. I didn't get around. I chose this one before John chose his, but I didn't get around to really reviewing it in depth, and I kind of worried about it because it's a little bit of an unusual methodology, but we're going to talk about that. The reason I didn't get around to reading it was because we had a visiting professor with us here at McGill last week. We had Chris Watling with us, who's just amazing and managed to enlighten us not only as to the future of health sciences education research in a panel, but also talked about the problem with formative assessment. And he, along with all our PhD students, set a record because he met with them each for 15 minutes each, which is really quite impressive. And they all got something out of it.
You know, it's like an ER doc is somewhere inside that neurologist called Chris Watling.
Exactly.
Just boom, 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 and adding value. Yeah.
Well, he certainly added value. So glad you were here, Chris, and hope you can come again. So I chose this paper because I wasn't very familiar with the methodology. And it's kind of scary because I remember a long time ago going to a workshop about this particular methodology, but I guess it didn't stick. I'm calling the paper Evolution of a Faculty Development Activity, Acting on Action and Developing the Developer. The article is called Evolving from Didactic to Dialogic, How to Improve Faculty Development and Support Faculty Developers by Using Action Research. It's in Teaching and Learning in Medicine, the most recent edition. The authors are Guochen Liao and Changshuang Peng from Taiwan, from Changchun University. So this article talks about faculty development, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it also talks about action research, and I'm going to have lots of questions for Lara as we go through this. But let's start out with FacDev. Well, we all know that faculty development is really important. It prepares faculty for whatever they're going to do, whether it be teaching or research or leadership or mentoring, you name it. And it also has an effect on the institution and helps with institutional change. That's something we've talked about a couple of times over the last few episodes. But what isn't really explored much is what faculty development can do to the faculty developers, the ones who are providing the FacDev. How faculty developers can improve their delivery by researching their own teaching. So this is important because a better understanding of this phenomenon means that educators can propose strategies to facilitate professional development of those faculty developers. So I'd like to know from John, Jason, Lara, have you ever done a faculty development thing, whatever, activity, where you haven't really been an expert in the content? You were kind of chosen because you knew a little bit about the process of, running a small group or something like that. I see Jason shrugging, but let's start with John.
That's my entire gig.
Exactly. I was going to say.
Knowing nothing about anything, but speaking with confidence. No, I have no idea what you're talking about, Linda.
Jason?
I thought you were going to ask us, how we've been transformed by that experience or something like that. I think there's lots of, as a clinician educator who's a generalist, we're often asked to do sessions to help others who may know just a little bit less than us. So we are the Sherpas to introduce them to some topic in health professions education. I think that happens all the time.
Lara?
So I've had a slightly different experience. Not that I haven't been asked to do things that I don't know a lot about, but then I tend to have the phone call. The phone call when you talk to them, you thank them so much, and you're really excited to do this, but maybe we could just twist the topic a little bit and do it in this kind of way. And suddenly, at least I have a pretty good grounding in it. And now I'm just doing additional reading, not like, what is, this term that they're asking me to talk about. So I tend to engage in more conversation with people. Maybe that's a thing.
So I agree with John. I'm often asked to do things because they know I can keep a small group in line or, fix the PowerPoint when it breaks or whatever. So it's a process person, but you learn.
So why are you failing on this podcast and keeping Jason in line?
I try. He's hard.
She doesn't have the mute button. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. You've got the mute button, John. But there's also thinking about what we actually learn when we do faculty development in terms of not the content, but the process. And sometimes because we don't know all that much about it and we're asked to come in, I think we can actually look at it from the outside and maybe make suggestions, or we can actually improve ourselves. I don't know whether any of you have had that experience of sort of reflecting on your teaching and trying it differently the next time. We'll go backwards. Lara, Jason, John.
I might have zoned out for a minute, Linda, and looked up my notes on action research because I was expecting that to come next. So
we'll forget Lara here. So, Jason or John?
What was the question again?
So the question is, have you reflected on your teaching
Always,
and tried
yeah.
something different the next time round?
So Linda's question was, do we reflect on our teaching after giving a fact dev session or whatever the fact dev is? And the answer is always. I don't know about you, but maybe I'm a little bit obsessive about this, but I am always thinking, is there another way I could have done that? I kind of have this little narrative in my head about rating whether or not how well that what I just did aligns with what I was imagining it was going to be. It's kind of like a performance, right? If you're a singer-songwriter like John tries to be, then, does that presentation match the concert you were trying to give? And that's how I feel about every time I do something like that.
I do it. And Jason, I know you do it too, because we've done roadshows. We've done roadshows across the country where we've been giving workshops. And at the end of those, we usually debrief with the other presenters. And I sometimes find actually with really high level, and Jason, you wouldn't know this, but with the other people that are really high level presenters, that we can be ultra critical in that we want to get it so perfectly that we're trying to get to that asymptote of having it down really nicely that we can actually be hypercritical, maybe sometimes to our detriment, right? We overshoot in trying to correct.
Yeah. What the one thing I'll add though, because Simon Fleming taught me a phrase once. He made some comments for me on tape about failure. And he said that when you get feedback about how you did, that's the breakfast of champions. And I'm like, you know what? It really is. And that's why for me, that kind of debriefing and that feedback from participants, that's just gold. It's the biggest gift anybody can give you, is to give you really candid, honest feedback, because I can't get better without it.
Yeah, especially if they care enough to make you better.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So in our faculty development environment, Yvonne Steinert and others always sat down with the whole FacDev team after whatever it was we did, and we did a debrief. And copious notes were kept, and magically they appeared, even if it was 2 or 3 years later. The last time we did this, we said this sort of thing. And it's really very helpful. Anyway, let's go on with our authors for this. So our authors decided to use action research, participatory action research, for this particular study. And I thought I needed a review of action research. So the first thing I did was read what the authors said. Action research is a form of collective self-reflective inquiry undertaken by researchers in social situations, aiming to understand and improve practice with an emphasis on linkage of reflection, action, theory of practice, and change. Well, that didn't help me very much. So I went, of course, to Dr. Google. And I found another thing that said it's a form of investigation designed for use by individuals in an attempt to solve problems. You get the idea. And improve practices in their own environment with systematic observations and data collection. I was still stuck. I mean, I kind of get it, but I really wanted it put more simply. So the way I view it is it's action research wants to simultaneously investigate and solve an issue or a problem. So it conducts the research and takes action and maybe looks at it and does it in an iterative way. It's formative, not summative, you could say, and it's conducted often with the participants. So they're co-researchers. So, what we've got here is participatory action research. And so I tried to figure out how to put it simply. And I came across something which I've adapted, but basically says, let's study what's happening in my or in our context, whether it be faculty development or school or curriculum or whatever, and decide how to make it better, do it at the same time as we're studying it. So in a way, it's similar to quality improvement, but it's not exactly the same. And Lara, one of the questions I've got for you is, how is QI and action research different in 25 words or less?
It's a really great question, Linda. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit out of my depth here because I'm not an action research scholar. This is not where I spend a lot of time. I've read enough about it. But because action research, QI research, we could also put some knowledge translation, knowledge implementation cycles starts to look a little bit like this too, because they all work on the same premise of try to effect change by doing something, see it how it went, make modifications to do it better, going back in, trying again, and cycling through iteratively, as you accurately pointed out. What is the major difference between them? Well, I think it really depends on the overall purpose you're aiming for. So with quality improvement, of course, there's that idea that there is a quality that is measurable. There's a sort of an end line of what you expect or the goal you're working towards. With action research, that's often more nebulous. It's not as clear cut. And with knowledge translation, of course, you're trying to get knowledge implementation. You're trying to get people to adopt different ways of working and acting with knowledge. So again, they all have a slightly different kilt to them or a slightly different orientation in terms of their purpose. One of the things that I find really challenging about action research is it's actually a bit of an umbrella term because there's a lot of different ways of doing action research. So there's many different branches. So it may be that there's an action research branch for QI. I didn't find one because I didn't think to look for QI, but I could really see that being there. So there might be one of those. It's interesting, though, because it was originally developed by somebody named Lewin, and he had a goal of enabling practitioners and social scientists to collaborate to bring about change, and to bring about specifically social change. So that's a point where, Linda, your comment about engaging with the community, I'm wondering what the others think about that, because, if just in case you didn't know, there's a SAGE handbook. SAGE does a lot of handbooks, and there's a handbook for action research. Of course, there is. It's in its third edition. So this already tells you that it's got a large body of work behind it. But the SAGE handbook talks about the importance of that social change, that social improvement, some kind of emancipatory social responsibility lens to it. So so I'm just wondering what you guys think about it.
And John, Jason?
I think it's really interesting, this idea of action research. I'm curious, though, when you know it ends. Because if you're in the midst of that ongoing process, when do you decide that I'm done? Unlike other research, you might have an innovation or an intervention, and then you say, okay, now that's done. Let's see what happened. And you don't have an opportunity for the next iterative cycle. At what point do you decide we're done? Is it you lose steam, you lose time, or do you hit some a priori established determination or benchmark of when you're going to stop? So I think that's an interesting challenge. I do find this example of action research interesting in that it was really only one researcher. He did have a second person there. And I think that would be a little less typical what I've seen. I've usually seen it as a team-based type of approach. And so I'm not sure if what we're going to hear in terms of the specific method from this paper is kind of a classic or archetypal type of action research methodology. But other than that, I think it's something that we should maybe talk a little bit more, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to implement this into what we're doing every day and to take some of the education refinement that we do and turn it into scholarship.
So I'm intrigued. I really want to hear more. This is not something I have a lot of experience with, or at least not officially. So I like this idea that it's action oriented. So it's like a PDSA cycle for yourself or for your team. I'm curious about how the methods are chosen and how rigor is determined when it's that kind of project.
Lara?
We can, Linda, when you're ready, we can talk about rigor. I actually found some stuff. I guessed that would be a question. So.
Okay, well, let's just wait a sec. First thing I'm just going to go back to is Lewin. Wasn't he the guy who did the freezing and unfreezing bit of change as well? I think he was. So he was a busy fellow. Secondly, I'm thinking back to some of the curricular change models, and I can't remember the name of the one that is iterative like this, which you change something, look at it, and change again. There's one of the older models. So this is not something that's new. Let's go back a little bit. What was the context here? The first author, who I happen to know because he did his master's degree in our program, led a series of workshops for faculty members about the mini CEX, the mini clinical evaluation exercise, in residency training, in a faculty development program to develop the skills of those faculty teachers in teaching and assessment. So this is a really good setup for action research, because the same, or at least the same title, workshop was done a series of times, which allowed for some iterativeness, if there is such a word, in the study. So what the author wanted to do was to understand, and what happens here is really interesting. He changes to the first person. So he says, I want to understand how I could improve a faculty development workshop by researching my teaching practices using the self-reflective inquiry of action research. So he did those 4 cycles for 4 particular workshops where he planned, did the workshop, observed himself, had others observe, and gathered other data, which we'll talk about in a sec, then reflected, and then changed what he did and went back and did it 4 times. And he had multiple sources of data for thematic analysis, which is only briefly described, but I think it's okay. And we're not here to talk about, as Jason would put it, the blah, blah, blah of qualitative research. That included the author's reflective journal, field notes that were taken by the second author, who was the researcher observer, and the written reflections and feedback from the 14 workshop attendees. The data was triangulated, and what came out was actually presented as a couple of tables, which actually took you through the plan, the action, the observation, the reflection, and then the claims to knowledge, which we'll get to talk about in a minute, with 4 cycles and what changed with each one. Lara, are you ready to talk about rigor now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Linda. So the book that this author cites for their action research reference. So I went back to the original source that they referenced so that I could try to make sure I was aligning with the, because it's a bit of an umbrella, right? You don't want to apply the wrong measures of rigor. But that text offers 7 criteria. So, and that can help us assess these methods. So 1, is there an articulation of objectives? I'm going to say yes. I'll give that a check. I found that. 2, partnership and participation, which is the extent and means by which the action research reflects participants' values and concern for the relationships with the stakeholders. So one of the really key principles of action research is the engagement and involvement of participants, of the population who are part of that space of change. That one feels a little weaker for me. I'll be interested what others think.
I'm going to disagree with you now, because in fact, the subject or the object is not the 14 doctors who actually took the fact dev. It's the person who is giving the fact dev, and that's the author.
So then the learners are stakeholders.
Yeah.
And then it's an action research, not for social change, but personal change.
Exactly, for transformative personal change.
Yeah. So number 3 is contribution to a wider body of practice or knowledge. So is there a line, and we'll see this later on because the author aligns it with work from a theory from Baker. So that works. I give that one a check. Appropriate use of methods and processes. I'm giving that a check. Actionability, which is the extent to which the action research provides new ideas that guide action. We'll see how we feel about the results.
I think that does it in spades, but anyway, we'll get to it.
But that's fine. And the 6 is reflexivity. Yes, that's there. And the last one is significance. The insights of the research have meaning and relevance beyond their immediate context. So I would gonna say out of the 7, I'm giving 4 solid yeses, and my other 3s are but I'm open to change. I'm open to being modified on those.
Was this planned? Because you did a lot of homework and got a lot of...
I do a lot of homework for all of this because qualitative research and something like it's not blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of rigor and thought and tradition, and it's deep science, man. If I could mute you, I'd mute you.
But I don't know who said methodology is blah, blah, blah. Methodology is really important. Just want to put that out there.
Okay, we'll listen to your previous podcasts about that. Okay, let's go on a little bit. So what did they find or he find? For this, the results are presented as a story. It's a case study. And it's actually summarized very nicely in the table, as I said. So each cycle starts with a plan for the workshop. And then the workshop is put into play. There is observation, evaluation, and then reflection. And for each of the cycles, a different theme emerged. And from each of those themes, there comes another plan, which actually is put into action for the next cycle. So the first theme was, I'm doing all the talking and they're not saying very much. How am I going to get them to engage? So engagement was the first theme. So our author actually made some changes to the structure of the workshop, the way he asked questions, the way he broke things up. And the second theme that came out was, I need to focus the discussion a little bit more. They're talking about things that are a little bit off track, and I need to enhance the dialogue so it's more useful. So again, there was the cycle, and the third theme was adaptive practice. How can I actually change my practice? How can I make changes? And that was done. And the fourth theme that came up was the theme of empowerment. Empowerment so that the author actually made self-improvement of their teaching practices. They felt a lot more confident. And the clinician teachers' capabilities of feedback and assessment were also enhanced. So the authors say the impact of this was that the workshop evolved. The first workshop was pretty didactic. By the end, it was basically a discussion. It was dialogic with continuous improvement on enhanced engagement, focused discussion, and participant empowerment. And these processes also supported the author's growth as a faculty developer. That's where I think it gets back to faculty. So, Jason, John, and Lara, comments on the results? Useful? Not?
So I gotta admit live here that I thought that when I first read this, I thought, I don't get this. It's a single person talking about themselves too much and, talking about some pretty basic intro to fact dev concepts. And by the end of it, I was like, this is the hero's journey. This is amazing. What a clever paper who's the brilliant editor they let this one in? I actually think this is a really unique paper. Maybe because I haven't been exposed to it. I do think it reflects kind of a hero's journey. This person struggled. They were taken out of their usual context. They had a mentor that guided them that's probably wearing a wizard hat. And then they were transformed, and then they got to a new land. And this reflects, my own journey as a presenter in medical education and lots of other people that I've tried to mentor, where they start really, really concrete. I was going to make a John joke, but I didn't. Really, really concrete. And then they start having insight when things, don't work. They start changing their technique. They go deeper, and then they're transformed themselves, and as well as their technique. So that's what a cool paper. I like it.
I think there's a lot of meta here. It's the use of narrative gives you that story, much like all business books have a story, like who took the cheese and all those other business books. And so it's an opportunity to use this type of resource about how you can change and develop as a teacher. I will say that there's a great deal of vulnerability to write a manuscript this way. And I don't know the culture at the Changgun Medical Education Research Center, but I think no matter how supportive they might be, there's a lot of vulnerability here. There's a lot of here's how I grew and developed. And I think that's the power I took from this manuscript. How to do a better workshop, this stuff is 101. Like, this is nothing surprising here. And the table they have about on the 4 themes, that's the part I just kind of rolled past. I was more interested in seeing, here's a great lived experience about how you grow and evolve as a teacher.
But they link together, those 4 themes and the growing and evolving as a teacher. Lara.
And could you make any sense of the diagram? I looked at that diagram a bunch of times. Which diagram is diagram?
Figure 1, was it?
Figure 1. I couldn't figure out what was happening there.
Yeah, same.
So I just thought
I just skipped over it.
I think it shows the top of the diagram is the original design of the workshop. The bottom of the diagram is the last design of the workshop, and it went through 4 cycles to get from first to last. That's the way I viewed it.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
What I want to do is I have nothing really to add from what John and Jason said, except the one thing I want to do is double down on that tip of the hat to the editors at Teaching and Learning in Medicine, because this is a risky paper. It's really different. If dear listener, if you haven't seen it, it really is worth reading just because it's nothing you're going to expect. So for that reason alone, I'm cheering for this paper. In terms of lessons learned and those sorts of things, I'm kind of on the same point as Jason and John. I think it's a great story. It's a really powerful narrative. I'm not sure that there's going to be a lot of new things that I'm going to take out of this, but I think that I really do want to compliment the journal and the authors for taking on this approach and taking on the challenge. I think they do well.
Jason.
So I just want to add, I'm thinking ahead to the impact. I was going to rebut that this has utility in terms of people you're working with and their own journey. You could give them a paper like this and say, hey, here's a methodology you might want to choose, or here's a parallel journey that might help you have insight. But it's not the most accessible paper. Let's just put that on the table. You got to kind of work your way through it to really get the meta out of it. And I'm not sure I would use it for all of the people I'm working with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I also had concerns about methodology but like this paper was an excuse for me to go back into action research, because now I'm starting to wonder, is this more autoethnography? And we won't go into all of that, but because I'm not sure, like, is this a paper that is this an approach we'll see other authors take?
So my understanding is that autoethnography is where you're observing yourself, but there's not necessarily change involved. Whereas with action research, there is some sort of something that you're going to act upon, and perhaps multiple times. So, all right.
It's the action part.
Yeah, the action part of action research. So I agree. I mean, I read this paper knowing the author, and then I started seeing the first person in here, and I thought, this is weird. And then I thought, it's very unusual for a generic research paper, but it's actually okay in this sort of a publication. I see the link, as John pointed out, with the identity formation of educators. I think that's, for me, one of the big links. Okay, so let's do our highly validated and highly irritating to Lara scale. 1 to 5 for methods. We'll go Lara, Jason, John.
So for methods, I'm going to suggest that this is probably a 3, but what I have to do is put a little asterisk beside it because I want to give it 2 numbers. Actually, that's my new thing, that I'm going to give it a 3 and a 4.
A bit of my soul dies every time you do this. Every
it's okay.
time.
No, it's a 3 in terms of, I'm not sure in terms of the action research rigor methods checklist that I went through.
You're a checklist princess, is what you are. You have your own
princess.
For a qualitative researcher, she's giving
I don't like that. Well, it's because I don't, but that's why I have to also give it a 4 because I'm not an action research expert, so I'm feeling a little.
So you have to be an expert to
it.
rate things now? Because I'm going to take back all of my scores.
I think you need to be an expert to score something. Yes, take back all your. Let's just get rid of it.
No.
Hard no.
I refuse.
Oh, well, there you go.
Now, that was a really long intro. Does anybody know what number Lara just offered?
All of them.
A 3.5.
She chose all of them.
Too funny.
Okay, Jason.
I really struggle with what to score this, not for Lara's reasons. I think it's a 3. I don't know a lot about action research, but I'm reading it as a peer educator who's trying to access this paper, and I followed along the logic, but I had trouble sometimes in this paper, so I'm going to give it a 3 for its methods.
John.
It's implied that the person who followed and took notes was probably also part of the analysis, but it was never said explicitly. And I worry about a research team of 1 that reflects by themselves. That you can't see what you can't see.
Why are you worried about that?
Well, we know that guided self-reflection is effective, but doing it independent of you without any other data to conform you or to just help you see what you can't see yourself is less effective.
Well, I think is more than implied. I can't remember what the second author was called, that they actually more than implied that he followed around.
In the research. They're involved in the research for sure. It just didn't say at the analysis point what their role was. Anyway, all that to say is 3.
A 3 after all that. So I'm using Lara's rigor scale.
Oh, this is like an infection now. We're getting in trouble.
But I just interpret some of those things a little bit differently. So I gave it a 6 out of 7 because of
a 6 out of 7.
No,
it's a scale of 5.
No. On your rigor scale, not on our scale. So because
checklist, don't use the word scale. It's checklist.
Checklist. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so 6 out of 7 on the checklist. And actually, I guess because I was presenting this paper, I read it multiple times and read about action research. It is a subset of action research called a case study, which is fine to do it with 1 person. And so I give it a 4. All right, let's go to education usefulness or impact. I'll go Jason, John, Lara.
I think this is a 3, and I'll just reiterate my reasoning. I think this is a little small little hero's journey. It's an example you can give to select people you're working with to talk about that journey, and I think that's its value. I'm not sure it's the paper I would go to illustrate participatory action research. I think there are other papers that are more accessible, so it gets a 3 for me.
John.
Sadly, I'm lined up with Jason's logic 100% here. So 3 from me.
Thank you.
The narrative is the narrative was what's gold here. How to run a workshop. There's faster stuff to get to. The methods is not an archetypal type of action research study. So 3.
What I heard John say before Lara goes is that I was right. Thank you. You get a little audio there, John. Thank you.
Eventually it has to happen there. Breaking Bad drug dealer.
Once in how many years?
Yeah.
So I'm going to blow all of you away because I want to give this a 5. And here's why. I know I'm giving it a 5 because this is not the paper. The reason I want to give this paper to clinician educators is to say this is what a scholarly attitude towards teaching looks like. This is what, if you're going to do engagement and scholarly work and do some research or any kind of scholarship, you're going to have to be thinking about your teaching practices in a fundamentally different way. Here's a beautiful illustration of that. So for that, it's a 5.
Yeah, that was exactly the reason I'm going to give it a 5. So we
get
come
your
out
rigor
with,
on.
Yes, get your rigor on. I like that. So there we have it. Action on action reflex. Action on action research, developing the developer. Thank you all for joining us at the Papers Podcast. And remember, you can check out our website at the Papers Podcast. And remember, too, that we are going to be presenting at the AMI conference in Glasgow, as in Glasgow, not Glasgow. And
That sounds the same as what I said.
Not
No,
really.
not really. No.
Not
You
really.
just don't understand my Scottish accent, that's all.
Us, aye, we do.
This is when we devolve. So I'll cut us off now and say talk to you later.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. See you in Glasgow.